I'm really sad because I had to put this mic in the middle of my shirt, and it makes the shirt not so happy. He's got a nose, okay. So in choosing my topic, one, it is nothing related to anything I do here at work, which is cool because I have a lot of interests, and this is one of my interests. One thing I want to say before I start is I think it's really important to kind of know how things obviously are created, how they get to the point that you know them, because it gives you a lot of background perspective. And I mean, you can think of things like concrete things like cars, like you should know how your car works or how your computer works or things like that. But I also think it can apply to abstract concepts as well. So hopefully this is not too laggy. My topic today is pi. It is not that pi. It is not that pi. It is this pi, the Proto-Indo-European language. So, yes, ooh, random. What is a language family? Let's just start off by talking about that. A language family has a common ancestor. So to give the well-known example, you have Vulgar Latin, which was like the people's language of the Roman Empire. And since it was all spread out all over the Roman Empire, it eventually, evolved over time into languages that ended up being Italian, French, Spanish, Romanian, and a bunch of other languages. In terms of evolution of language, I mean, there's a lot of similarities between this and, let's say, like biology. So for instance, you have early birds like Archaeopteryx. I mean, from there you get ostriches, ducks, hawks, chickens. I mean, it's a very similar process. So for an example of a word in the Romance languages, I'm going to take a look at father. In Latin, and I'm going to probably script pronunciation of everything today, so forgive me. But in Latin, it's pater, or whatever that is. In Italian, it's padre. In French, it's père. In Spanish, it's padre again. And in Romanian, it's pater. Now, one of these is a little off. But there's an explanation for that. So basically, you gotta connect the dots, right? I mean, you have a duck and you have a flying reptile bird. There's obviously an intermediate thing, which in this example is a vegavis, which lived 66 million years ago. An artist's depiction of its natural environment. Notice the giant dinosaurs in the background. Notice how it kind of looks like a goose-duck thing, but it probably has claws on its wings and teeth in its beak, so it's an intermediate thing, right? Same thing for French. Father in Old French started off being pedre, which is very similar to those other words. And then it got shortened down to père, and then they threw an accent in it because it's French. So yeah, I mean, basically historical linguistics is very much like evolution. You're going to be studying the in-between things so that you can understand how one word leads to another. So there are other words that are very similar to pater, that mean father in other languages, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce these. You have very similar words in Greek, Sanskrit, Persian, German, and of course even English has father. All very similar, which is kind of weird because, I mean, none of these are Romance languages. But let's focus on the Germanic languages. So again, German, Vater, okay, sure. English, father. Dutch, another Vater. Does that lag? Danish, Vater. Okay, that's great. So all of these words are pretty similar. And so what people that are studying this can figure out is they can reconstruct the original word. So we already know what Latin is. We have records of that. We know what the word was. The ancestor of these languages, we don't, and that's Proto-Germanic. So what they do is they reconstruct using these examples and other languages that are in the Germanic language family. They can reconstruct something that sounds like Vater. And that's like, they use this kind of use the asterisk there to kind of signify that it is a reconstructed word. They don't actually know how it was even spelt, because the Proto-Germans could maybe not have been literate. All they have is a kind of rough idea of how it was pronounced. They can actually get pretty detailed and know things like what the plural form might be and other things based off what its children languages do. So you have the Proto-Germanic word, which is very similar, again, in a way, to the Latin word. And so you think, well, maybe they have a common ancestor. And the common ancestor is Proto-Indo-European. And this, I assume, is something like futur, or I don't know. But that is what they think the word father is in the ancestral Proto-Indo-European language. And again, reconstructed. So Indo-European languages is a massive family of languages. I will use Keynote animations to show you. It is a huge thing. Don't expect to see the detail of this. There is a wonderful Wikipedia article that has this on there, which is where I shamelessly stole this from. But basically, it's a huge family of languages. All the green boxes are all the languages that still exist today. All the red boxes are extinct languages. So we don't know, we might have records of those languages, we might not. But you can get some ideas basically of what a wide spread this language family is. So in this area, you have the European languages, words based on the Iberian Peninsula, in France, Italic languages, Greek languages. All the way up at the top is the most primordial languages, Anatolia, so the Hittite Empire. They used a language that was Indo-European. Slavic, German, the Iranian languages, the languages of northern India and Pakistan, that kind of area. All of those are related to each other. There's other proto-languages as well, other language families. Proto-Afro-Asiatic, that would be languages like Arabic, Hebrew, Berber, older languages like Egyptian, those are all related. Proto-Dravidian is all the languages of more of southern India. Proto-Uralic would be languages like Finnish, Hungarian, Estonian. Austronesian's kind of crazy because a lot of these are island languages of the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. So they range all the way from Hawaiian, which is super far east, to the Malagasy that they speak on Madagascar, which is way to the west. So this is a very spread out language family. Proto-Indo-Aztecan, which is basically all the languages of the Southwest. So what the Aztecs spoke. The names of most of the counties in Arizona all have a Indo-Aztecan root. And then there's actually a really controversial one, which is why I don't have the word proto here. But people are trying to pierce together the Altaic languages. So Japanese, Mongolian, Korean, Turkish. The reason why they believe that these are all related is Turkish. I don't know if you're familiar with your history of the Turkic people. They kind of migrated from what is now Siberia, and they kind of moved their way down. Mongols helped move that, and now you have some people in Turkey, you have some people in the stands of that area of Asia. And because that was way originally closer to Mongolia, Korea, and Japanese, and they can reconstruct the words and they can see similarities between the languages, they think they're all related, but it's a very controversial language family. So why would you study a proto-language? Well, the obvious reason to do so, besides the fact that language is cool, is you can know an Urheimite, I think I'm pronouncing it, it's German, which is a language family's homeland. So for Proto-Indo-European, they think that most likely the originators of this language came from the Central Asian steppes near the Caspian Sea. And in archaeology, which, completely separate science, has its own evidence, everything like that, this is known as the Kurgan hypothesis. So what they're saying is the people that spoke Proto-Indo-European, they started out there and they migrated away. And granted, there were people speaking other language families in other areas. I mean, you've got the Basque in Spain, completely separate and also really confusing language in terms of origin. Those guys probably were a lot more widespread, but the Proto-Indo-European language speakers probably pushed them away. So you have this huge migration. And then other evidence of the Kurgan hypothesis, besides things like pottery and things like that, you look at the domestication of the horse, which was in the same area, in those steppes. And if you look at like the use of the chariot, which is what this diagram is here, you can see it started out in the same area, and it kind of spread along the same lines as well. Another point of evidence is genetics. So what they can do is they can look at the haplogroup associated with various Indo-European speakers today, and they can look at the remains of Indo-European speakers from millennia ago, and people they know were speaking languages that they know are Indo-European, and they can see those connections, and it kind of helps fuel the evidence there. Another fun and exciting thing about Proto-Indo-European culture, besides the language, is the religion and the connections there. So, for instance, they have reconstructed that there was a chief god or god of the sky or the day. If you recall the word for father, father of the sky or father of the day, that's what that name means. And it's pronounced something along the lines of Dios Peter or whatever, which sounds a lot like Zeus. Like Dios, Zeus, or whatever. I don't know. I'm bad at pronouncing. Sounds really a lot like Jupiter. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce that Hindu one, but I mean, literally, look at it. Just, it's obvious. They also reconstructed the word day, which is very similar to this word. And you can see how this turns into Latin diem, as in carpe diem, as well as looking like the English word for day, but I don't know the actual path that that word took through history. Other things related to religion. They have a related word to this word, which is deus. That became essentially the Latin word for deity. This is also where we get the word divine. Another fun thing is that became Proto-Germanic tiwaz or whatever, which turned into Old Norse Tyr, which of course is a Norse god. So there's a lot of, in terms of language, there's a lot of similarities between these variety of different mythologies that happened all over this area. There's also shared mythologies, and there's a ton of these, but I just picked out the really easy ones. So in different types of mythologies, you have somebody fighting a dragon or a serpent. A lot of widespread sun chariots. So in Greek, Helios, Hindu, Surya, Germanic, Sol, they all had a sun chariot. They also all had floods, but that's kind of more of a worldwide occurrence, and there's other explanations for that, like the Ice Age melting and fossils in mountains and stuff like that. So, but it's common to Indo-European. So the second part of my talk, going back to what we know about PIE and Proto-Germanic, is how do words evolve? So let's start with a Proto-Indo-European word, berg, not to be confused with barg. It means hill or mound, something along those lines. They know that eventually when it entered Proto-Germanic, or it became Proto-Germanic, it became something that I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of, a byrjana or something like that. That means to shelter. And that in turn became Old English byrjan, which means to hide. And then something happened. The great vowel shift of the English language. So it was a major change in the pronunciation right after the end of the Middle Ages. To give you the example, same used to sound like psalm. Feet used to sound like fate. Wipe used to sound like weep. So basically, if you time traveled back, you Doctor Who'd yourself all the way back to this time period, and you were in a Shakespeare, or listening to a Shakespeare play, or probably a little bit earlier than that, you would be completely confused because people would be saying words that make absolutely no sense to you. But it's just because they pronounced their vowels completely differently back then. Possible causes of this, there were a lot of migrations around Europe because of the aftermath of the Black Plague. England was kind of controlled by the French up to a certain point during this period where it became more English. And so that the aristocracy and all that kind of swapped over. There were a lot of political and social upheavals. So there was a lot of chaos, essentially, in how people were saying things, and that could cause some problems. Problem is in this time period where England finally grew up, they were like, oh, hey, let's make sure we got English down straight. Bad timing, because while they can't figure out how to pronounce their own vowels and other words, they were also trying to figure out how to spell them properly. So everybody was consistent. So we come back to the word byrjan and its sad tale throughout history. It as I keep saying, it's pronounced something like byrgan. That Y sound is supposed to be kind of like a U. It started being pronounced in different areas. I mean, this is literally the principle of dialects. It started being pronounced differently in various regions of England. In London, where people are smart, they pronounce it like the U in put. So it would be like burr, right? Burr, burr. In southern England, where people are a bit crazy, it's like the I in pit, which, interestingly enough, I can't think of an occurrence in the English language where this combination is actually possible, of having a short I followed by an R. So it's kind of like saying beer, but like bear or something like that. I literally practiced it for like a couple of minutes and I just gave up. I couldn't find an example of it being pronounced. And then in southeastern England, where they're completely lost their minds, it is pronounced like the impet, and therefore bear. So this is what happened. The scholars in London standardized the word burian as the Middle English version of this word because Y was turning into U everywhere. So that's why we don't have crazy words like BYR or like there used to be a lot more Ys, but now they're all U's. So they were doing that. But for some idiotic reason, they were easily influenced by the southeastern pronunciation. So instead of pronouncing it burian, they were idiots and called it barian. And then when bury came about, they were actually pronouncing it berry. So just to let you all know, you are all wrong for pronouncing it berry because it should be bury. It's just they got confused. And then, oddly enough, this is actually the same thing that happened to busy. Busy also is a stupid pronunciation. What happened is they used the southern pronunciation. So instead of bezzy or boozy or whatever, they went with that pit thing, and now it's called busy. So again, nonsense. And this is why English is stupid. And that's all I have.